As a staff team, we celebrate one another's birthdays, and this past week we were ready to bring the cake in, and I got rather muddled up. I gave the wrong person's name, and it all became rather complicated and confused. And like so many of those situations, I just went from bad to worse. Among much hilarity and laughter, one of the staff team eventually said, "Well, looks as though Paul's going to be doing Easter on his own." And really, before I'd thought too much about it, the words were out of my mouth, just like Jesus. In our 5-week series building to Easter, we arrive at Golgotha, the place of the skull, where the cross of Jesus was erected, where he hung and died over that 6-hour period from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And I think the main point of what I want to say is that sense of being utterly alone. Jesus faced Easter alone. For us to be brought in, he had to be cast out, not just in a physical or psychological sense, but as we shall see, in the most profound spiritual sense imaginable. The torment of the cross began hours before the actual event itself. Last week, Paul Sankey was helpfully unpacking something of the mind of Jesus in Gethsemane, and that awful sense of anticipation. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. Jesus went through the psychological and emotional torment of being deserted by his friends, of being arrested by a crowd with weapons, of being falsely accused, of hearing one of his closest disciples disown him 3 times. He was intimidated before Herod and Pilate, false accusation after false accusation thrown at him. He was intimidated by the soldiers, spat upon, mocked, stripped naked, and flogged. We know from contemporary eyewitness accounts that Roman flogging was brutally efficient. The whips embedded with nails, with pieces of pottery, and even pieces of animal bone, capable of opening a human back. And then Jesus was made to carry his cross out of the city to the place of execution. It took 6 hours for Jesus to die, from 9 in the morning till 3 that first Good Friday afternoon. And during that time, the 4 gospel writers record 7 words from the cross, or 7 short phrases. I focus just on one of those, the 4th word, my God, why have you forsaken me? The word why is a question of utter incomprehension. Why has this happened to me? So many countless human lives over the centuries, the millennia, have made a similar cry. It's a cry of utter bewilderment. Jesus experiences the bewilderment of abandonment for which he was totally unprepared. Why have you? The word have is in the Greek an aorist tense. It's the same that would be used of a stab or a thunderclap. It's something that happens in a moment, that takes your breath away, catches you totally by surprise. Nothing had prepared Jesus for this act of abandonment. He begins the question, God, the standard Greek word theos, not Abba, Father, the intimate familiar word that Jesus normally used when he was addressing his Father. This word is a word almost with none of the intimacy left. It's his Father who has now become the distant God. For us to be brought in, Jesus had to be put out. My God, why have you forsaken me? That word you is almost a cry of longing for the intimacy that is suddenly withdrawn. It's as though the Father, who has been Jesus' constant rock, his companion, the focus of his love, his adoration, and his prayer life. but now this God turns his back. Forsaken is a Greek word that means to abandon, to leave in the lurch, to leave without hope or help or future, utterly to desert. And this week, as we build finally to our fifth location, garden, I invite you to reflect upon the passion of Jesus, to allow yourself to enter with your imagination the depths of suffering that the Son of God underwent for each one of us. I'd like to invite you to read Psalm 22. Psalm 22 begins with the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's clear that actually on the cross, Jesus was meditating on that particular psalm. This psalm, written by David hundreds of years before Jesus lived, hundreds of years before crucifixion was even invented in the minds of the Romans. And yet as you read Psalm 22, you'll see how clearly it maps the suffering of a victim of crucifixion. It even talks about the soldiers dividing his garments, playing lots for them. It describes his bones being torn out of sockets as he wrestled for breath. The death of crucifixion is a slow, lingering death by eventual suffocation. Think on these things. Pray about them. Then let the positive verses of Psalm 22 lift your hopes as they must have done Jesus, as his thoughts turn towards God as vindicator, the God who would not abandon, the God who would draw close to be his and our deliverer. Let this Holy Week be a journey into the reality of the cross, and let it lead your hearts, your minds, and your prayers into thanksgiving for what Jesus has done for each of us.